Why are you a poet?
Because I have to be, I suppose. Ever since I was about 15, I just had to, the art that I cleaved to was writing. I started out with drawing. I drew since about the age of 7. And I really, really wanted to show people what the world really looked like, because all the adults I talked to, they would always avoid me. I was smart as a kid. I was the one the preacher ran from in Sunday school. I used to go to church, and it's because I would ask him questions that the Bible or his sermons wouldn't answer, and I quickly became known as the mannish boy when I was a little kid. So I got to high school and I decided instead of doing it by art, even though I was really, really good, and I still continue my artwork, but I don't know. To me, I feel that poetry, out of all the artistic disciplines they have, poetry is like the bedrock, because everything in human experience begins with the word. Everything in religion begins with the word. God invoking the ocean, and invoking land, and invoking breath into man. It all begins with the word. And I feel that's the most powerful, how should I say it? That's the most powerful component of human existence.
Throughout your poetry career, have there been any kind of influences that stick with you, teachers or mentors?
The person that probably influenced me the most, and this will probably make you laugh, to write poetry, is June Jordan and Stephen King. I was an avid Stephen King reader, and since about the age of 4, comic books. So I suppose I'd have to give kudos to Marvel, although I don't even read Marvel anymore because they're all about making the money, and DC is slowly following suit. So I just buy DC. But June Jordan, she was a phenomenal poet. She was an activist. She was a teacher. This is a woman that defied, the rules that are set now, because when a rule is wrong, to follow it and say, oh, well, it's the law, that's a cop-out. When something is wrong, and when something is wrong because there's a human part of you that feels it. I don't care what law they pass. If it's wrong, it's wrong. And to follow it makes you complicit in the act. So June Jordan and Stephen King. I like Stephen King mainly because he's the best character writer I've ever read in reading, and people, he hasn't won any of the huge, humongous awards. He should have won a Nobel Prize, because one of the prime tenets of the Nobel Committee is that you are an author who disseminates your work throughout the world. And the woman that wrote Harry Potter and Stephen King, I don't know anybody who is, he's approaching Bible volume now, both of these authors. People read their thoughts, And June Jordan, one of the reasons when I started applying to colleges, I applied to Berkeley simply because June Jordan was teaching there. But she died before I could gain admittance, so I just, didn't even try again. I ended up getting accepted at Harvard, UC Davis, Arizona State, and Fresno State. And I picked UC Davis because of one of my teachers at the junior college, Porterville College I went to, which was actually a much harder school than UC Davis. At UC Davis, I would write a 7-page paper 2 hours before class, and they'd give me an A+ on that. And it got to the point where I wasn't even being challenged. At Porterville, man, you had to work. You really had to put in work. And I'd say, even though I majored in English and African and African American Studies at UC Davis. My degree, my junior college degree, is what's important to me. And, but anyway, those are the two. Of course, I have this book here, Freedomland Blues, published by Transcendent Zero Press. And I'm really proud of this book because I could actually say this book is about 20 years in the making, because two of the poems in here actually I started when I was 15 years old, and I'm 60 years old now. I mean, and I put a lot into this book. And one of the things is I love the blues, because most people think that the blues are sad songs, you know, and they're not. They're actually songs of perseverance. And in the same way, I tried to show in this book that with all the wrongs that we have in this country, it's not they and them we have to blame for it, but us, you know, because they and them are us. You know, when our so-called leaders do something bad, they're doing bad because they can't help themselves. They're just bad people, you know. But it's us that allow them to do it. So we're complicit in whatever evil they're up to. So that's the thing about when I wrote this book. I started with introspection because one of the poets I really like is Emily Dickinson, and her poetry was written completely from introspection. I figured like this: if I could find the flaws and foibles and stuff within myself, you know, before I would point the finger at anybody or any organization out there, I had to look within myself and figure out why I did the things I did. That way it would give me an understanding of why people do things out there. Because with all the books and stuff, all the knowledge out there, you know, the psychology and the psychiatry that they have written, people are still just repeating history over and over. They're steadily thinking that they're reinventing something, but they're not. I mean, the thing that dismays me, even in some states now, they're trying to rewrite the history and erase something. Well, the next generation that come up, I mean, there are a lot of things you can ask them about now that happened during my lifetime. They have no idea it even happened. So when this instance comes up again, they make the same mistake that they made before. It's like a crackhead addiction. You know, you keep doing the same thing with the same results over and over and over until it kills you. You know, so anyone who reads this book, I mean, you know, it should really, I mean, this is a book that every parent needs to sit down and discuss with their child. This is a book that educators should be using in their class. And come to think of it, before I published this book, a lot of my poems were disseminated in colleges, amongst middle school kids, high school kids. They explicated, they discussed my poems in class. And I'm not your traditional poet. I have this great idea that there is actually a mathematical algorithm which can be applied to words themselves so as to evoke certain emotions and certain, you know, abilities in people. I have a strong belief that each human being has within themselves this great good, but dependent on how much wrong and how much evil they do in life, it keeps shrinking, you know. It keeps shrinking, but it's energy, so it can never be destroyed. It can be continually be compressed like a black hole. And some of them end up, their little bit of good gets so small, just like a black hole, their evil begins to suck in, you know, other people. But that little piece of evil goes on, and I think newborn children get them, you know, and they get to live over and over, because whoever or whatever created us in this universe, I don't believe that they would want to destroy it. And, you know, that energy goes on. And I hope people can look at this. I mean, it's a lightning bolt down through the middle of this page that kind of signifies that power. And it also signifies the power that the blues invokes in those who are downtrodden and stuff. So buy the book, become somebody.
So, what are your plans for the book right now? I know it just got released this past September, correct?
Yes, it just came out towards about the middle of September. And I've been doing readings and stuff like that, and I don't have in about a week I'll have a tight schedule, and the schedule will be posted at Transcendent Zero Press in about, probably about the 10th of October. And right now, I mean, I have this great idea for an anthology that I would like to put together. And right now it's still in the, I suppose, writing it down on paper thing, on the paper process. But I have this great anthology I thought of because of what happened in Ferguson, Mississippi, last month. The thing is, all throughout that, I mean, there were pointing fingers on both sides. Rattle Literary Journal put out a edition about a year ago in which half of it was dedicated to police officers who wrote poetry. And these were police officers from all over the world. And I was thinking, how something like that could really let the people understand what these police would go through. Because I've always been one, I mean, no matter how much trouble I'm in, the last person I'm gonna call for help is the police. So I want to know their story. I am willing to give a person a chance to, and you can't really judge someone unless you get to know them. So it's an idea I have. I think that will be probably my next project. And I also have a collection of short stories that I'm sending around to publishers.
How would you describe your work to a person? If a person never experienced your work, they sat down and they said, tell me about your poetry, what would you say?
I would say my poetry is like June Jordan and Patricia Smith mixed together. June Jordan was a big pioneer of black English, speaking in the dialect and idiom and slang that black people use. And a lot of people know it as Ebonics. But, and then on the other side, you have this academic professor who is like the king of, the queen, I should say, of slam poetry. I mean, she's been national champion so many times, it ain't funny. And her poetry is phenomenal, her books. She is an awesome poet. But I suppose the poetry I write, instead of hewing to the classicals like I learned in school, I learned Blake and Emily Dickinson and Shelley, and these are the ones they teach you in colleges. And if they throw in any people of color, it's usually Langston Hughes who they throw in. Most students, they don't know who County Cullen is or Phyllis Wheatley, and they haven't been acquainted with Amira Baraka, or even Nikki Giovanni, who I really love. But I suppose it's classical poetry meets slam poetry, which is not to be mistaken for rap, because rap and slam poetry are two different things in terms, but they both generate from the word.
Let's go ahead and define poetry. What's poetry for you?
Okay. When I think of poetry, I think of communication. And communication and community are the same in that they tend to bring the one together with another. So when I look at poetry, it is a form of communication that seeks to bring the one together with another. It seeks to get two opposing views to come to a compromise that makes both sides happy. And I think that's what poetry is. And that is why it's so powerful. It looks for a compromise, but it doesn't beg for a compromise. It doesn't, barter for a compromise. You have to be truthful when you write poetry. I mean, if you try to censor poetry in any way, you're not writing poetry. Poetry is not to be censored. I mean, if you go into a poetry reading and they say, "Oh, you can't use curse words," or whoop-de-whoop-de-whoop, well, they're not holding a poetry reading. What they're doing is acting like government agents and censoring your work. I've been invited to readings and conferences, and they take a look at my poem. "Well, you'll have to change this," and I'm like, "Nope, you can keep your money and you can keep your conference and you can go to hell, because my poetry will be read, it will be written on the word." I mean, that's the main thing when I was putting this together. That's why I'm so thankful that Justin Pickering, the editor of Transcendental Weasel Press, he really worked with me. He understood that, the way the poet, the way the artist makes his art is the way that he wants to present it to the world. Not, to compromise in any way so that it fits a marketing scenario or something. And, I'm telling you, man, I'm really proud of this work. I mean, I am. I know that, I've done other work before, and I look at it and I'm like, oh man, once it's out there and published, I'm like, oh man, what was I thinking? That wasn't right, that wasn't right. But I mean, I went over and over and over the manuscript for this book before I sent it in. And I wanted something that people could, they could read it over and over and always find something new in it, every time they read it. Get the Freedomland Blues. Y'all need to get some Freedomland Blues.
Yeah, what would you say to a person that's saying poetry's dead? It's not important.
Poetry is not dead. The idea of poetry is dead in people's mind. Excuse me. Poetry has been alive, since if you want to get religious about it, since God breathed life into man, since he said, "Let there be light," poetry was alive since then, and it's alive today. What happens is too many people take the academic perception of poetry, the stuff that they studied in school that they didn't really want to study, but those great minds who deemed that as something that was necessary for a well-rounded education, they picked out the ones. And I mean, for a long time, this was consigned to let's face it, old dead white men, And there were women out there from all over the world that wrote astounding poetry. There were people of every color, faith, the poems that they picked, up until I'd say the early 2000s for you to study in universities. They were rehashing the same thing over and over. Now those were great poems. Osmondius, Blake's poems, Emily Dickinson even. Those were great poems. But the thing is, we got the Patricia Smiths, we got the June Jordans, we got the Langston Hughes, we have Naomi Shihadnai, we have a breadth of Iraqi and even poets from Iran, poets from Africa. Oh, they have a wealth of them. And instead of saying, hey, you pick the poems you want to study, they said, well, these are the ones that amount. They said these are the ones that count. This other stuff isn't poetry. And in a way, they were right and they were wrong, because to be a poet, I believe that the words you write, you have to also walk the walk. The stuff you write has to be a part of your life. So I know with me, the stuff I write in this poem, I've been in trouble all my life because I live like in these poems. And it's not because I'm a bad person. It's because, like I say, a lot of the laws they have they aren't laws. They aren't looking out for all the people. They're just, somebody trying to line their own pocket. So poetry is very much alive today, and you'll find it in this book mainly from the slam poetry that I've injected into it. Like I said, I've taken what was deemed as classical poetry and I slammed it up against slam poetry. And the young people coming out today, one of the things that I find, a lot of them are writing in abbreviated sentences, and that is coming out of the use of technology. Technology is changing the way we perceive and write poetry today. So it's very much alive. The only thing is so few people are aware of that. They still have an older perception of what poetry is. And it's nothing like poetry that exists today.
So, do you think that we talked a little bit about the academics, we talked a little bit about how poetry's alive today. Do you think publishers are having a bit of an effect on the way poetry is viewed?
Well, the publishers are trying to survive. In this world today, technology is slowly but surely erasing books. I mean, even big organizations like Amazon are finding that people aren't buying books like they were. And at first I was worried. I said, well, wow, man, people have just stopped reading. And in this case, it is so. I mean, because in the United States, the illiteracy in the United States is actually growing instead of decreasing. More people here can't read, in the English. But then on the other hand, like I said earlier, technology is changing the way we communicate. And, it's doing that in a bad way and in a good way. In a good way is, it seems like they're creating this new language that they use. I notice it in poetry. And I understand what they're saying, but it's like getting a text message. And then in a bad way, I find out a lot of students, because I tutor a lot, they can't even write a sentence. They can't put a simple sentence down. It's our ability to communicate with one another. In some instances, it seems to be dying. And this will affect poetry overall, because as hard as it is to get somebody to come to a poetry reading or read a book of poetry, more and more it will get to the point where one of the complaints that people had about old poetry is they couldn't understand it. Well, a lot of the new stuff that's coming out now, I am a poet, and some of it I can't understand. I can understand the musicality of the words. I can feel the passionate emotion that the writer is trying to bring out, but as far as coherent sentence, it's not happening. And that's something I tried to get away, because one of the components of slam poetry is to be very, very clear. So, like I say, it will, there still will be instances where you'll run into poetry that you'll have no idea of, because even I, an accomplished poet, that happens to me. But that should not dissuade you from reading poetry. And more than anything, whenever I put out my book, I'm happy that a person would buy my book. That fills me with joy. Something I worked on, someone's feel like it is of worth. But as much as I need the money as a struggling poet, what I need is for a person to read that book. And when even if they don't like it or don't want it, pass it on to someone else. I want what I write to be read, and I make it a point to always write in second person, because the last thing I want to do is push my views, beliefs, or thoughts on someone else. I simply write a story about something that someone saw. You know, there are different speakers in my poem. There are female and male speakers in my poem. There are adults and there are children in there. You know, there are groups and there are individuals. And by them looking at someone else's experience, I hope this will give them the time to really make up their mind and see what our world really is instead of what we are made to believe it is. That's what poetry is supposed to do. Yeah.
Okay. The internet has made a lot of things easier, a lot of things more accessible. What are your feelings towards the internet and its effects on poetry?
Okay. Like I say, technology will both hurt and help poetry. And today, I mean, I can sit down and I can send off 10 submissions without leaving the comfort of my home. I mean, as long as you're hooked up to the web, it's just a matter of that. I mean, some of these journals, they charge fees for reading the submissions, and some of them charge fees for the contests they have. Well, all I do is look for the journals that either pay cash or at least send out contributor copies, and I never send anything to contests that charge you money, or I never send anything to journals that charge you to read. And this is for the simple reason that this work is something I'm competing with millions of other people all over the world, and if they accept mine, then it's something special about it. And just like a novelist, just like a songwriter, just like a painter of great pictures, this is art I've created, and I expect to be paid for it. I mean, not from this is my calling for life, and this is my job, and anyone who works wants to be paid for their work. So I feel the same way. And with the internet, one of the good things about the internet is, say, for instance, they have this company called Submittable, where journals archive their submissions. And you can go back there and find out if it's been declined, if they're still reading it, and this is a good thing. I mean, whereas it used to be a time you used to have to type out your poems, you had to put them in an envelope and send them out and wait, months and months and months to get a return thing, or they would call you on the telephone. But nowadays, just a press of a computer button, instantly, whether you're going to be in a submission or not. And this gives them the opportunity to get a lot more diverse segment of the world to send their submissions in. And I don't know, like I said, the only really bad thing I see between the conjunction of technology and poetry is, in some instances, people are using it in a way, along with the growing illiteracy in this country, to form a pattern of speech that cuts down on communication between two people. I mean, I would love to see I have seen poems written completely in text message ideograms and great poems, but then I've seen some attempts at it. I mean, it's basically like the stuff that you get in a phone call or something. And, in a lot of the programs now, our young people aren't being taught to talk to one another. They know that talking to a phone now, or tap into a computer, or get behind a video camera and log into YouTube or whatever. But the idea of, like I said, poetry is one person trying to get with another, okay? And this is what they're losing in today.
Okay. There's an article online that says you can tell a medium is still vital by posing this question: can it change anything? does poetry have the power to change anything?
Poetry isn't going to stop a war. Poetry isn't going to stop a bullet in a drive-by. Poetry isn't going to stop a policeman from beating a black teenager to death, you know. But what poetry will do is it will so incite a person's conscience that they will be driven to act, you know. If poetry didn't have any power, then there wouldn't be so many poets who have been pushed up against wall and shot. I mean, they've been in prison. There's one poet in China now, and there's another one in Russia now, and they're noted poets. I mean, just because they posted a poem, they've been in prison for life. I mean, and I think it's vital because poetry is a pathway into our reality. Poetry is something that no matter what the status quo leaders in this country say is going on or what the corporate media says is going on, poetry is always going to dig at that root that is growing in each of our hearts. And it's going to incite our conscience. It's going to make us where we can no longer go along with something that is being wrong. And in my lifetime, I mean, I have written poems, and I have had people come to me and they say, you know, I read your poem, and even the ones that didn't agree with it, they said, it has changed my life. It's given me a different way to look at something. You know, instead of continuing on with my belief. So when I write my poems, I do put solutions in there, but I put them in there in such a way that the reader thinks that they thought. See, that way, if a person thinks that, well, this was my idea, they will fight to the death for it because then it has come a belief. So poetry is the beginning of all art. Poetry is the word.
Okay. What is your message to young people, to the youth, to new people, to poetry? What would you tell a new poet?
Go online and cycle through as many literary journal websites that you can, because you will be amazed at the wealth of poetry out there. I mean, and this is just to show you, from poetry has grown slam poetry, has grown rap, have grown a lot of forms of music today, has grown flash fiction. I mean, today people are writing short stories that are 1 page long. And these short stories that are 1 page long is like reading a 400-page paperback. You know, they compress that much characterization and plot, you know, in it. I mean, it's incredible. But just, you know, go to the poetry section. Even if you're not going to buy a book, read one poem out of it. Come back a week later, read one poem out of another book. And I guarantee you, you will find something in there that will awaken something in you that no amount of wrongdoing will ever be able to quiet down. So